Chapter 10. The Lot. 1. The town knew about darkness. It knew about the darkness that comes on the land when rotation hides the land from the sun, and about the darkness of the human soul. The town is an accumulation of 3 parts, which, in sum, are greater than the sections. The town is the people who live there, the buildings which they have erected to den or do business in, and it is the land. The people are Scotch-English and French. There are others, of course, a smattering, like a fistful of pepper thrown into a pot of salt, but not many. This melting pot never melted very much. The buildings are nearly all constructed of honest wood. Many of the older houses are salt boxes, and most of the stores are false-fronted, although no one could have said why. The people know there is nothing behind those false facades, just as most of them know that Loretta Starcher wears falsies. The land is granite-bodied and covered with a thin, easily ruptured skin of topsoil. Farming is a thankless, sweaty, miserable, crazy business. The harrow turns up great chunks of the granite underlayer and breaks on them. In May, you may take out your truck as soon as the ground is dry enough to support it, and you and your boys fill it up with rocks perhaps a dozen times before harrowing, and dump them in the great weed-choked pile where you have dumped them since 1955, when you first took this tiger by the balls. And when you have picked them, until the dirt won't come out from under your nails when you wash, and your fingers feel huge and numb and oddly large-pored, you hitch your harrow to your tractor, and before you've broken 2 rows you bust one of the blades on a rock you missed. And putting on a new blade, getting your oldest boy to hold up the hitch so you can get at it, the first mosquito of the new season buzzes bloodthirstily past your ear, with that eye-watering hum that always makes you think it's the sound loonies must hear just before they kill all their kids or close their eyes on the interstate and put the gas pedal to the floor, or tighten their toe on the trigger of the 30-30 they just jammed into their quackers. And then your boy's sweat-slicked fingers slip and one of the other round harrow blades scrapes the skin from your arm, and looking around in that kind of despairing, heartless flicker of time, when it seems you could just give it all over and take up drinking, or go down to the bank that holds your mortgage and declare bankruptcy. At that moment of hating the land and the soft suck of gravity that holds you to it, you also love it, and understand how it knows darkness and has always known it. The land has got you, locked up solid got you, and the house and the woman you fell in love with when you started high school, only she was a girl then, and you didn't know for shit about girls, except you got one and you hung on to her, and she wrote your name all over her book covers, and you first broke her in, and then she broke you in, and then neither one of you had to worry about that mess anymore. And the kids have got you, the kids that were started in the creaky double bed with the splintered headboard. You and she made the kids after darkness fell, 6 kids, or 7, or 10. The bank has got you, and the car dealership, and the Sears store in Lewiston, and John Deere in Brunswick, but most of all the town has you, because you know it the way you know the shape of your wife's breast. You know who will be hanging around Crosson's store in the daytime, because Nap's shoe laid him off, and you know who is having woman trouble even before he knows it, the way Reggie Sawyer is having it, with that phone company kid dipping his wick in Bonnie Sawyer's barrel. You know where the roads go, and where on Friday afternoon you and Hank and Nolly Gardner can go and park and drink a couple of 6-packs or a couple of cases. You know how the ground lies, and you know how to get through the marshes in April without getting the tops of your boots wet. You know it all, and it knows you. How your crotch aches from the tractor saddle when the day's harrowing is done, and how the lump on your back was just a cyst and nothing to worry about like the doctor said at first it might be, and how your mind works over the bills that come in during the last week of the month. It sees through your lies, even the ones you tell yourself, like how you're going to take the wife and kids to Disneyland next year, or the year after that, like how you can afford the payments on a new colour TV if you cut cordwood next fall, like how everything is going to come out all right. Being in the town is a daily act of utter intercourse, so complete that it makes what you and your wife do in the squeaky bed look like a handshake. Being in the town is prosaic, sensuous, alcoholic. And in the dark the town is yours and you are the town's, and together you sleep like the dead, like the very stones in your north field. There is no life here but the slow death of days, and so, when the evil falls on the town, its coming seems almost preordained, sweet and morphic. It is almost as though the town knows the evil was coming and the shape it would take. The town has its secrets and keeps them well. The people don't know them all. They know old Albie Crane's wife ran off with a travelling man from New York City, or they think they know it. But Albie cracked her skull open after the travelling man had left her cold, and then he tied a block on her feet and tumbled her down the old well, and 20 years later Albie died peacefully in his bed of a heart attack, just as his son Joe will die later in this story, and perhaps someday a kid will stumble on the old well where it is hidden by choked blackberry creepers and pull back the whitened, weather-smoothed boards, and see that crumbling skeleton staring blankly up from the bottom of that rock-lined pit, the sweet travelling man's necklace still dangling green and mossy over her ribcage. They know that Hubie Marsden killed his wife, but they don't know what he made her do first, or how it was with them in that sun-sticky kitchen in the moments before he blew her head in, with the smell of honeysuckle hanging in the hot air like the gagging sweetness of an uncovered charnel pit. They don't know that she begged him to do it. Some of the older women in town, Mabel Verts, Glynis Maybury, Audrey Hersey, remembered that Larry McLeod found some charred papers in the upstairs fireplace, but none of them know that the papers were the accumulation of 12 years' correspondence between Hubert Marsden and an amusingly antique Austrian nobleman named Breichen, or that the correspondence of these two had commenced through the offices of a rather peculiar Boston book merchant, who died an extremely nasty death in 1933, or that Hubie had burned each and every letter before hanging himself, feeding them to the fire one at a time, watching the flames blacken and char the thick, cream-coloured paper and obliterate the elegant, spider-thin calligraphy. They don't know he was smiling as he did it, the way Larry Crockett now smiles over the fabulous land title papers that reside in his safe deposit box of his Portland bank. They know that Coretta Simons, old Jumpin' Simon's widow, is dying slowly and horribly of intestinal cancer, but they don't know that there is better than $30,000 cash tucked away behind the dowdy sitting room wallpaper, the results of an insurance policy she collected but never invested, and now, in her last extremity, has forgotten entirely. They know that a fire burned up half of the town in that smoke-hazed September of 1951, but they don't know that it was set, and they don't know that the boy who set it graduated valedictorian of his class in 1953, and went on to make $100,000 on Wall Street, and if they had known, they would not have known the compulsion that drove him to it, or the way it ate at his mind for the next 20 years of his life, until a brain embolism hustled him into his grave at the age of 46. They don't know that the Reverend John Groggins has sometimes awakened in the midnight hour with terrible dreams, still vivid beneath his bold pate, dreams in which he preaches to the little Mrs. Thursday night Bible class naked and slick, and they ready for him. Or that Floyd Tibbets wandered around for all of that Friday in a sickly daze, feeling the sun lie hatefully against his strangely pallid skin, remembering going to Ann Norton only cloudily, not remembering his attack on Ben Mears at all, but remembering the cool gratitude with which he greeted the setting sun, the gratitude and the anticipation of something great and good. Or that Hal Griffin has 6 hot books hidden in the back of his closet, which he masturbates over every opportunity. Or that George Midler has a suitcase full of silk slips and bras and panties and stockings, and that he sometimes pulls down the shades of his apartment over the hardware store and locks the door with the bolt and the chain, and then stands in front of the full-length mirror in the bedroom until his breath comes in short stitches, and then he falls to his knees and masturbates. Or that Carl Foreman tried to scream and was unable when Mike Ryerson began to tremble coldly on the metal work table in the room beneath the mortuary, and the scream was as sightless and soundless as glass in his throat when Mike opened his eyes and sat up. Or that 10-month-old Randy McDougall did not even struggle when Danny Glick slipped through his bedroom window and plucked the baby from his crib and sank his teeth into a neck still bruised from his mother's blows. These are the town's secrets, and some will later be known, and some will never be known. The town keeps them all with the ultimate poker face. The town cares for devil's work no more than it cares for God's or man's. It knew darkness, and darkness was enough. 2. Sandy McDougall knew something was wrong when she woke up, but couldn't tell what. The other side of the bed was empty. It was Roy's day off, and he had gone fishing with some friends. Would be back around noon. Nothing was burning, and she didn't hurt anywhere, so what could be wrong? The sun. The sun was wrong. It was high up on the wallpaper, dancing through the shadows cast by the maple outside the window. But Randy always woke her before the sun got up high enough to throw the maple shadow on the wall. Her startled eyes jumped to the clock on the dresser. It was 10 minutes after 9. Trepidation rose in her throat. "Randy?" she called, her dressing gown billowing out behind her as she flew down the narrow hall of the trailer. "Randy? Honey?" The baby's bedroom was bathed in submerged light from the one small window above the crib. Open. But she had closed it when she went to bed. She always closed it. The crib was empty. "Randy?" she whispered, and saw him. The small body, still clad in wash-faded Dr. Dentons, had been flung into the corner like a piece of garbage. One leg stuck up grotesquely, like an inverted exclamation point. "Randy!" She fell on her knees by the body, her face marked with the harsh lines of shock. She cradled the child. The body was cool to the touch. "Randy! Honey, baby! Wake up! Randy! Randy! Wake up!" The bruises were gone. All gone. They had faded overnight, leaving the small face and form flawless. His colour was good. From the only time since this morning she found him beautiful, and she screamed at the sight of the beauty, a horrible, desolate sound. "Randy, wake up! Randy! Randy! Randy!" She got up with him and ran back down the hall, the dressing gown slipping off one shoulder. The high chair still stood in the kitchen, the tray encrusted with Randy's supper of the night before. She slipped Randy into the chair, which stood up in a patch of morning sunlight. Randy's head lolled against his chest, and he slid sideways with a slow and terrible finality until he was lodged in the angle between the tray and one of the chair's high arms. "Randy," she said, smiling. Her eyes bulged from their sockets like flawed blue marbles. She patted his cheeks. "Wake up now, Randy. Breakfast. Randy, is you hungry? Please, oh Jesus, please." She whirled away from him and pulled open one of the cabinets over the stove and poured through it, spilling a box of rice checks, a can of Chef Boyardee ravioli, a bottle of Wesson oil. The Wesson oil bottle shattered, spraying heavy liquid across the stove and floor. She found a small jar of Gerber's chocolate custard and grabbed one of the plastic Dairy Queen spoons out of the dish drainer. "Look, Randy, your favourite. Wake up and see the nice custard. Chocker, Randy, chocker, chocker." Rage and terror swept her darkly. "Wake up!" she screamed at him, and her spittle beaded the translucent skin of his brow and cheeks. Wake up for the love of God, you little shit! Wake up!" She pulled the cover off the jar and spooned out some of the chocolate-flavoured custard. Her hand, which knew the truth already, was shaking so badly that most of it spilled. She pushed what was left between the small slack lips, and more fell off onto the tray, making horrid plopping sounds. The spoon clashed against his teeth. "Randy," she pleaded, "stop fooling your mama." Her other hand stretched out, and she pulled his mouth open with a hooked finger and pushed the rest of the custard into his mouth. "There," said Sandy McDougall. A smile, indescribable in its cracked hope, touched her lips. She settled back in her kitchen chair, relaxing muscle by muscle. Now it would be all right. Now he would know she still loved him, and he would stop this cruel trickery. "Good," she murmured. "Chocker good, Wendy. Will you make a smile for Mummy? Be Mummy's boy and give me a smile." She reached out with trembling fingers and pushed the corners of Randy's mouth. The chocolate fell out onto the tray. Plop. She began to scream. 3. Tony Glick woke up on Saturday morning when his wife Marjorie fell down in the living room. "Margie?" he called, swinging his feet onto the floor. "Marge?" And after a long pause, she answered, "I'm okay, Tony." He sat on the edge of the bed, looking blankly down at his feet. He was bare-chested and wearing striped pyjama bottoms, and the drawstring dangling between his legs. The hair on his head stood up in a crow's nest. It was thick black hair, and both his sons had inherited it. People had thought he was Jewish, but that Dago hair should have been a giveaway, he often thought. His grandfather's name had been Glichucci. When someone had told him it was easier to get along in America if you had an American name, something short and snappy, Gramps had had it legally changed to Glick, unaware he was trading the reality of one minority for the appearance of another. Tony Glick's body was wide and dark and heavily corded with muscle. His face bore the dazed expression of a man who had been punched out leaving a bar. He had taken a leave of absence from his job, and during the past work week he had slept a lot. It went away when he slept. There were no dreams in his sleep. He turned in at 7:30 and got up 10 the next morning and took a nap in the afternoon from 2 to 3. The time he had gone through between the scene he had made at Danny's funeral and this sunny Saturday morning, almost a week later, seemed hazy and not real at all. People kept bringing food, casseroles, preserves, cakes, pies. Margie said she didn't know what they were going to do with it. Neither of them were hungry. On Wednesday night, he had tried to make love to his wife, and they both began to cry. Margie didn't look good at all. Her own method of coping had been to clean the house from top to bottom, and she had cleaned with a maniacal zeal that precluded all other thought. The days resounded with the clash of cleaning buckets and the whir of the vacuum cleaner, and the air was always redolent with the sharp smells of ammonia and Lysol. She had taken all the clothes and toys, packed neatly into cartons, to the Salvation Army in the Goodwill store. When he had come out of the bedroom on Thursday morning, all those cartons had been lined up by the front door, each neatly labelled. He had never seen anything so horrible in his life as those mute cartons. She had dragged all the rugs out into the backyard and hung them over the clothesline, and had beaten the dust out of them unmercifully. And even in Tony's bleary state of consciousness, he had noticed how pale she had seemed since last Tuesday or Wednesday. Even her lips seemed to have lost their natural colour. Brown shadows had insinuated themselves beneath her eyes. These thoughts passed through his mind in less time than it takes to tell them, and he was on the verge of tumbling back into bed when she fell down again, and this time did not answer his call. He got up and padded down to the living room, and saw her lying on the floor, breathing shallowly and staring with dazed eyes at the ceiling. She had been changing the living room furniture around, and everything was pulled out of position, giving the room an odd, disjointed look. Whatever was wrong with her had advanced during the night, and her appearance was bad enough to cut through his days like a sharp knife. She was still in her robe, and it had split up to mid-thigh. Her legs were the colour of marble, and the tan she had picked up that summer on their vacation had faded out of them. Her hands moved like ghosts. Her mouth gaped as if her lungs could not get enough air, and he noticed the odd prominence of her teeth, but thought nothing of it. It could have been the light. "Margie? Honey?" She tried to answer but couldn't, and real fear shot through him. He got up to call the doctor. He was turning to the phone when she said, "No, no." The word repeated between a harsh gasp for air. She had struggled up to a sitting position, and the whole sun-silent house was filled with her rasping struggle for breath. "Pull me. Help me. The sun is too hot." He went to her and picked her up, shocked by the lightness of his burden. She seemed to weigh no more than a bundle of sticks. "Sofa." He laid her on it, with her back propped against the armrest. She was out of the patch of sun that fell in a square through the front window and onto the rug, and her breath seemed to come a little easier. She closed her eyes for a moment, and again he was impressed by the smooth whiteness of her teeth in contrast to her lips. He felt an urge to kiss her. "Let me call the doctor," he said. "No, I'm better. The sun was burning me, made me feel faint. Better now." A little colour had come back into her cheeks. "Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm okay." "You've been working too hard, honey." "Yes," she said passively. Her eyes were listless. He ran a hand through his hair, tugging at it. "We've got to snap out of this, Margie. We've got to. You look—" He paused, not wanting to hurt her. "I look awful," she said. "I know. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror before I went to bed last night, and I hardly seemed to be there. For a minute A smile touched her lips. "I thought I could see the tub behind me, like there was only a little of myself left, and it was, oh, so pale. I want Dr. Reardon to look at you," but she seemed not to hear. "I've had the most lovely dream the last 3 or 4 nights, Tony. So real. Danny comes to me in the dream. He says, 'Mummy, Mummy, I'm so glad to be home.' And he says, what does he say?" he asked her gently. "He says that he's my baby again, my own son at my breast again, and I give him to suck, and then a feeling of sweetness with an undertone of bitterness, so much like it was before he was weaned, but after he was beginning to teethe, and he would nip. Oh, this must sound awful, like one of those psychiatrist things." "No," he said. "No." He knelt beside her and put her arms around his neck and wept weakly. His arms were cold. "No doctor, Tony, please. I'll rest today." "All right," he said. Giving in to her made him feel uneasy. "It's such a lovely dream, Tony," she said, speaking against his throat. The movement of her lips, the muffled hardness of her teeth beneath them, was amazingly sensual. He was getting an erection. I wish I could have it again tonight. Maybe you will, he said, stroking her hair. Maybe you will at that. 4. My God, don't you look good, Ben said. Against the hospital world of solid whites and anemic greens, Susan Norton looked very good indeed. She was wearing a bright yellow blouse with black vertical stripes and a short blue denim skirt. You too, she said, and crossed the room to him. He kissed her deeply, and his hand slid up to the warm curve of her hip and rubbed. Hey, she said, breaking the kiss. They kick you out for that. Not me. No, me. They looked at each other. I love you, Ben. I love you too. If I could jump in with you right now, just wait a second and let me pull back the spread. How would I explain it to those little candy stripers? Tell them you're giving me the bedpan. She shook her head, smiling, and pulled up a chair. A lot has happened in town, Ben. He sobered. Like what? She hesitated. I hardly know how to tell you, or what I believe myself. I'm mixed up, to say the least. Well, spill it and let me sort it out. What's your condition, Ben? Mending, not serious. Matt's doctor, a guy named Cody. No, your mind. How much of this Count Dracula stuff do you believe? Oh, that. Matt told you everything. Matt's here in hospital. 1 floor up in intensive care. What? He was up on his elbows. What's the matter with him? Heart attack. Heart attack? Dr. Cody says his condition is stable, but he's listed as serious. But that's mandatory for the first 48 hours. I was there when it happened. Tell me everything you remember, Susan. The pleasure had gone out of his face. It was watchful, intent, fine-drawn. Lost in the white room, the white sheets, and the white hospital Johnny, he again struck her as a man drawn to a taut, perhaps fraying edge. You didn't answer my question, Ben. About how I took Matt's story? Yes. Let me answer you by saying what you think. You think the Marston house has buggered my brain to the point where I'm seeing bats in my own belfry, to coin a phrase. Is that a fair estimate? Yes, I suppose that's it. But I never thought about it in such harsh terms. I know that, Susan. Let me trace the progression of my thoughts for you if I can. It may do me some good to sort them out. I can tell from your own face that something has knocked you back a couple of steps. Is that right? Yes, but I don't believe... Can't. Stop a minute. The word can't blocks up everything. That's where I was stuck. That absolute goddamned imperative word, can't. I didn't believe Matt, Susan, because such things can't be true. But I couldn't find a hole in his story any way I looked at it. The most obvious conclusion was that he had jumped the tracks somewhere, right? Yes. Did he seem crazy to you? No, but... Stop. He held up a hand. You're thinking can't thoughts, aren't you? I suppose I am, she said. He didn't seem crazy or irrational to me either, and we both know that paranoid fantasies or persecution complexes just don't appear overnight. They grow over a period of time. They need careful watering, care and feeding. Have you ever heard anyone talk in town of Matt having a screw loose? Ever heard Matt say that someone had a knife out for him? Has he ever been involved with any dubious causes? Fluoridation causes brain cancer, or Sons of the American Patriots, or the NLF. Has he ever expressed an inordinate amount of interest in things such as seances or astral projection or reincarnation? Ever been arrested that you know of? No, she said. No to everything. But Ben, it hurts me to say this about Matt, even to suggest it, but some people go crazy very quietly. They go crazy inside. I don't think so, he said quietly. There are signs. Sometimes you can't read them before, but you can afterward. If you were on a jury, would you believe Matt's testimony about a car crash? Yes. Would you believe him if he had told you he saw a prowler kill Mike Ryerson? Yes, I guess I would. But not this? Ben, I can't just... There, you said it again. He saw her ready to protest and held up a forestalling hand. I'm not arguing his case, Susan. I'm only laying out my own train of thought, okay? Okay, got it. My second thought was that somebody set him up. Somebody with bad blood or a grudge. Yes, that occurred to me. Matt says he has no enemies. I believe him. Everybody has enemies. There are degrees. Don't forget the most important thing. There's a dead man wrapped up in this mess. If someone was out to get Matt, then someone must have murdered Mike Ryerson to do it. Why? Because the whole song and dance doesn't make sense without a body, and yet, according to Matt's story, he met Mike purely by chance. No one led him to Dell's that Thursday night. There was no anonymous call, no note, nothing. The coincidence of the meeting was enough to rule out a setup. What does that leave for rational explanations? That Matt dreamed the sounds of the window going up, that laugh, the sucking sounds, that Mike died of some natural but unknown causes. You don't believe that either. I don't believe that he dreamed hearing the window go up. It was open, and the outside screen was lying on the lawn. I noticed it, and Parkins Gillespie noticed it. And I noticed something else. Matt had latch-type screens on his house. They lock on the outside, not the inside. You can't get them off from the inside unless you pry them off with a screwdriver or a paint scraper. Even then it would be tough. It would leave marks. I didn't see any marks. And here's another thing. The ground below that window was relatively soft. If you wanted to take off a second-floor screen, you'd need to use a ladder, and that would leave marks. There weren't any. That's what bothers me most. A second-floor screen removed from the outside and no ladder marks beneath. They looked at each other somberly. He resumed. I was running this through my head this morning. The more I thought about it, the better Matt's story looked, so I took a chance. I took the can't away for a while. Now, tell me what happened at Matt's last night. If it will knock all this into a cocked hat, no one is going to be happier than I. It doesn't, she said unhappily. It makes it worse. He had just finished telling me about Mike Ryerson. He said he heard someone upstairs. He was scared, but he went. She folded her hands in her lap and was now holding them tightly as if they might fly away. Nothing else happened for a little while, and then Matt called out, something like he was revoking his invitation. Then, well, I don't really know how to. Go on, don't agonize over it. I think someone else, made a kind of hissing noise. Then there was a bump as if something had fallen. She looked at him bleakly, and then I heard a voice say, I will see you sleep like the dead, teacher. That's word for word. And when I went in later to get a blanket for Matt, I found this. She took the ring out of her blouse pocket and dropped it into his hand. Ben turned it over, then tilted it toward the window to let the light pick out the initials. MCR. Mike Ryerson. Mike Corey Ryerson. I dropped it and then made myself pick it up again. I thought you or Matt would want to see it. You keep it. I don't want it back. It makes you feel bad. Very bad. She raised her head defiantly. But all rational thought goes against this, Ben. I'd rather believe that somehow Matt murdered Mike Ryerson and invented the crazy vampire story for reasons of his own, rigged the screen to fall off, did a ventriloquist act in that room while I was downstairs, planted Mike's ring, and gave himself a heart attack to make it all seem more real, Ben said dryly. I haven't given up hope on rational explanations, Susan. I'm hoping for one, almost praying for one. Monsters in the movies are sort of fun, but the thought of them actually prowling through the night isn't fun at all. I'll even grant you that the screen could have been rigged. A simple rope sling anchored on the roof would do the trick. Let's go further. Matt is something of a scholar. I suppose there are poisons that would cause the symptoms that Mike had. Maybe undetectable poisons. Of course, the idea of poison is a little hard to believe because Mike ate so little. You only have Matt's word for that, she pointed out. He wouldn't lie, because he would know that an examination of the victim's stomach is an important part of any autopsy, and a hypo would leave tracks. But for the sake of argument, let's say it could be done, and a man like Matt could surely take something that would fake a heart attack. But where is the motive? She shook her head helplessly. Even granting some motive we don't suspect, why would he go to such Byzantine lengths, or invent such a wild cover story? I suppose Ellery Queen could explain it somehow, but life isn't an Ellery Queen plot. But this is lunacy, Ben. Yes, like Hiroshima. Will you stop doing that? She whip-cracked at him suddenly. Don't go playing the phony intellectual. It doesn't fit you. We're talking about wives' tales, bad dreams, psychosis, anything you want to call it. That's shit, Ben said. Make connections. The world is coming down around our ears and you're sticking at a few vampires. Salem's Lot is my town, she said stubbornly. If something is happening here, it's real, not philosophy. I couldn't agree with you more, he said, and touched the bandage on his head with a rueful finger. And your ex packs a hell of a right. I'm sorry, that's a side of Floyd I never saw. I can't understand it. Where is he now? In the town drunk tank. Parkins Gillespie told my mum he should turn him over to the county, to Sheriff McCaslin, that is. But he thought he'd wait and see if you wanted to prefer charges. Do you have feelings in the matter? None whatever, she said steadily. He's out of my life. I'm not going to. She raised her eyebrows. But I want to talk to him. About us. About why he came at me wearing an overcoat, a hat, sunglasses, and Playtex rubber gloves. What? Well, he said, looking at her, The sun was out, it was shining on him, and I don't think he liked that. They looked at each other wordlessly. There seemed to be nothing else on the subject to say. 5. When Nolly brought Floyd his breakfast from the excellent cafe, Floyd was fast asleep. It seemed to Nolly that it would be a meanness to wake him up just to eat a couple of Pauline Dickens hard-fried eggs and 5 or 6 pieces of greasy bacon. So Nolly disposed of it himself in the office and drank the coffee too. Pauline did make nice coffee, you could say that for her. But when he brought in Floyd's lunch, and Floyd was still sleeping, still in the same position, Nolly got a little scared and set the tray on the floor and went over and banged on the bars with a spoon. "Hey, Floyd, wake up, I got your dinner." Floyd didn't wake up, and Nolly took his keyring out of his pocket to open the drunk tank door. He paused just before inserting the key. Last week's gun smoke had been about a hard guy who pretended to be sick until he jumped the turnkey. Nolly had never thought of Floyd Tibbets as a particularly hard guy, but he hadn't exactly rocked that Mears guy to sleep. He paused indecisively, holding the spoon in one hand and the key in the other. A big man whose open-throat white shirts always sweat-stained around the armpits by noon of a warm day. He was a league bowler with an average of 151 and a weekend bar hopper with a list of Portland red light bars and motels in his wallet right behind his Lutheran ministry pocket calendar. He was a friendly man, a natural fall guy, slow of reaction and slow to anger. For all those not inconsiderable advantages, he was not particularly agile on his mental feet, and for several minutes he stood wondering how to proceed, beating on the bars with a spoon, hailing Floyd, wishing he would move or snore or do something. He was just thinking he'd better call Parkins on the Citizens Band and get instructions when Parkins himself said from the office doorway, "What the hell are you doing, Nolly? Cooling the hogs?" Nolly blushed. "Floyd won't move, Park. I'm afraid that maybe he's, sick." "Well, do you think beating the bars with that goddamn spoon made him better?" Parkins stepped by him and unlocked the cell. "Floyd," he shook Floyd's shoulder. "Are you all right?" Floyd fell off the chained bunk and onto the floor. "God damn," said Nolly. "He's dead, ain't he?" But Parkins might not have heard. He was staring down at Floyd's uncannily reposeful face. The fact slowly dawned on Nolly that Parkins looked as if someone had scared the bejesus out of him. "What's the matter, Park?" "Nothing," Parkins said. "Just, let's get out of here." And then, almost to himself, he added, "Christ, I wish I hadn't touched him." Nolly looked down at Floyd's body with dawning horror. "Wake up," Parkins said. "We've got to get the doctor down here." 6. It was afternoon when Franklin Bodin and Virgil Rathburn drove up to the slatted wooden gate at the end of the Burns Road fork, 2 miles from Harmony Hill Cemetery. They were in Franklin's 1957 Chevrolet pickup, a vehicle that had been Corinthian ivory back in the first year of Ike's second term, but which was now a mixture of shit brown and primer paint red. The back of the truck was filled with what Franklin called crappy. Once every month or so, he and Virgil took a load of crappy to the dump, and a great deal of said crappy consisted of empty beer bottles, empty beer cans, empty half-kegs, empty wine bottles, and empty Popov vodka bottles. "Closed," Franklin Bodin said, squinting to read the sign nailed to the gate. "Well, I'll be dipped in shit." He took a honk off the bottle of Dawson's that had been resting comfortably against a bulge in his crotch, and wiped his mouth with his arm. "This is Saturday, ain't it?" "Sure is," Virgil Rathburn said. Virgil had no idea if it was Saturday or Tuesday. He was so drunk he wasn't even sure what month it was. "Dump ain't closed on Saturday, is it?" Franklin asked. There was only one sign, but he was seeing 3. He squinted again. All the signs said closed. The paint was barn red, and had undoubtedly come out of the can of paint that rested inside the door of Dud Rogers' caretaker shack. "Never was closed on Saturday," Virgil said. He swung his bottle of beer toward his face, missed his mouth, and poured a blurt of beer on his left shoulder. "God, that hits the spot." "Closed," Franklin said, with mounting irritation. "That son of a whore is off on a toot, that's what. I'll close him." He threw the truck into first gear and popped the clutch. Beer foamed out of the bottle between his legs and ran over his pants. "Winder, Franklin," Virgil cried, and let out a massive belch as the pickup crashed through the gate, knocking it onto the can-littered verge of the road. Franklin shifted into second and shot up the rutted, chuck-holed road. The truck bounced madly on its worn springs. Bottles fell off the back end and smashed. Seagulls took the air in screaming, circling waves. A quarter of a mile beyond the gate, the Burns Road fork, now known as the Dump Road, ended in a widening clearing that was the dump. The close-pressed alders and maples gave way to reveal a great flat area of raw earth, which had been scored and runnelled by constant use of the old case bulldozer, which was now parked by Dud's shack. Beyond this flat area was the gravel pit where current dumping went on. The trash and garbage, glitter-shot with bottles and aluminium cans, stretched away in gigantic dunes. Goddamn no-account hunchbacked pisswa. Looks like he ain't ploughed nor burned anything all week long, Franklin said. He jammed both feet on the brake pedal, which sank all the way to the floor with a mechanical scream. After a while the truck stopped. He's laid up with the case, that's what. I never knew Dud to drink much, Virgil said, tossing his empty out the window and pulling out another from the brown bag on the floor. He opened it on the door latch, and the beer, crazied up from the bumps, bubbled out over his hand. All them hunchbacks do, Franklin said wisely. He spat out of the window, discovered it was closed, and swiped his shirt sleeve across the scratched and cloudy glass. We'll go see him. Might be something in it. He backed the truck around in a huge wandering circle, and pulled up with the tailgate hanging over the latest accumulation of the lot's accumulated throwaway. He switched off the ignition, and silence pressed in on them suddenly. Except for the restless calling of the gulls, it was complete. "Ain't it quiet?" Virgil muttered. They got out of the truck and went round to the back. Franklin unhooked the S-bolts that held the tailgate and let it drop with a crash. The gulls that had been feeding at the far end of the dump rose in a cloud, squalling and scolding. The two of them climbed up without a word and began heaving the crappie off the end. Green plastic bags spun through the clear air and smashed open as they hit. It was an old job for them. They were a part of the town that few tourists ever saw, or cared to. Firstly, because the town ignored them by tacit agreement, and secondly, because they had developed their own protective coloration. If you met Franklin's pickup on the road, you forgot it the instant it was gone from your rearview mirror. If you happened to see their shack with its tin chimney sending a pencil line of smoke into the white November sky, you overlooked it. If you met Virgil coming out of Cumberland Greenfront with a bottle of welfare vodka in a brown bag, you said hi, and then couldn't quite remember who it was you had spoken to. The face was familiar, but the name just slipped your mind. Franklin's brother was Derek Bodin, father of Richie, lately deposed king of Stanley Street Elementary School, and Derek had nearly forgotten that Franklin was still alive and in town. He had progressed beyond black sheepdom. He was totally grey. Now, with the truck empty, Franklin kicked out a last can, clink, and hitched up his green work pants. "Let's go see Dud," he said. They climbed down from the truck, and Virgil tripped over one of his own rawhide lacings and sat down hard. "Christ, they don't make these things half right," he muttered obscurely. They walked across to Dud's tar paper shack. The door was closed. "Dud!" Franklin bawled. "Hey, Dud Rogers!" He thumped the door once, and the whole shack trembled. The small hook-and-eye lock on the inside of the door snapped off, and the door tottered open. The shack was empty, but filled with a sickish, sweet odour that made them look at each other and grimace. They were the barroom veterans of a great many fungoid smells. It reminded Franklin fleetingly of pickles that had lain in a dark crock for many years, until the fluid seeping out of them had turned white. "Son of a whore," Virgil said. "Worse than gangrene." Yet the shack was astringently neat. Dud's extra shirt was hung on a hook over the bed, the splintery kitchen chair was pushed up to the table, and the cot was made up army style. The can of red paint, with fresh drips down the sides, was placed on a fold of newspaper behind the door. "I'm about to puke if we don't get out of here," Virgil said. His face had gone whitish green. Franklin, who felt no better, backed out and shut the door. They surveyed the dump, which was as deserted and sterile as the mountains of the moon. "He ain't here," Franklin said. "He's back in the woods someplace, laying up snookered." "Frank?" "What?" Franklin said shortly. He was out of temper. "That door was latched on the inside. If he ain't here, how'd he get out?" Startled, Franklin turned around and regarded the shack. "Through the window?" he started to say, and then he didn't. The window was nothing but a square cut into the tar paper and buttoned up with all-weather plastic. The window wasn't large enough for Dud to squirm through, not with the hump on his back. "Never mind," Franklin said gruffly. "If you don't want to share, fuck him. Let's get out of here." They walked back to the truck, and Franklin felt something seeping through the protective membrane of drunkenness. Something he would not remember later, or want to. A creeping feeling. A feeling that something here had gone terribly awry. It It was as if the dump had gained a heartbeat, and that beat was slow yet full of terrible vitality. He suddenly wanted to go away very quickly. "I don't see any rats," Virgil said suddenly. And there were none to be seen, only the gulls. Franklin tried to remember a time when he had brought the crappie to the dump and seen no rats. He couldn't, and he didn't like that either. "He must have put out a poison bait, huh, Frank?" "Come on, let's go," Franklin said. "Let's get the hell out of here."